They said my father died broke, careless, a man who wasted everything. That was the story whispered at his funeral. Neighbors, distant relatives, even some of my own family nodding along like it was fact. And for a while, I believed them. Because when someone dies, the truth feels slippery. You're drowning in grief, clutching at scraps of memory, and if everyone around you insists a man died broke, it's easier to nod than to fight. But here's what they didn't know. My dad wasn't polished. He never wore suits or drove shiny cars. He came home smelling of oil and dust, his hands blackened, his shirt stained. He wasn't the type to brag about investments or savings. He was the type to stuff 20 pounds into a coffee tin just in case, to fix a car with scrap parts and a curse, then hand over the keys like it was brand new. He wasn't perfect. He had a temper. He gambled on ideas that never worked out. But broke? Careless? That didn't fit the man I knew. Still, when I started sorting through his things, boxes of unpaid bills, final notices, foreclosure letters, it looked like everyone else was right. I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor of his empty house, one hand clutching overdue statements, the other resting on an old photo album. On one side, the man in the pictures, grinning with grease on his face, lifting me onto his shoulders at the county fair. On the other, the man these papers painted, reckless, irresponsible, a cautionary tale. And for the first time, I felt doubt heavier than grief. What if they were right? What if the man I loved had left nothing but debts and excuses? That should have been the end of the story. But then I found something. By the third weekend of clearing out his place, I'd stopped expecting anything except more debt. The house was half empty, the living room stripped bare, the kitchen cabinets cleaned out. I moved on to the garage, a space that smelled like oil, rust, and cigarettes that had burned out years ago. That's when I saw it. At first it looked like nothing. Just an old metal box shoved under a workbench, hidden beneath a stiff, dusty tarp. I pulled it out and realized it wasn't a toolbox at all. It was a lockbox, heavy for its size, with a keyhole so rusted it looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. My heart gave a stupid little leap, like I'd stumbled onto buried treasure. Just as quickly I laughed at myself, knowing Dad it probably held expired coupons, or a broken watch he swore he'd fix one day. Still, the weight of it made me curious. I turned it over in my hands and noticed something faintly scratched into the metal, like he'd done it absent-mindedly with a screwdriver. 2 words. Barn safe. I froze. Dad hadn't owned a barn in years. The only barn I could think of was the rotting shed on my grandparents' old property, land he used to help care for before it was sold. It didn't make sense, but the words stuck in my head. I shoved the box into my bag and kept searching. That's when I found the notebook. It was buried in a drawer of tangled cords and loose screws, the leather cover scarred and stained from grease. Most of it looked like nonsense, oil changes, grocery lists, addresses. But near the back, my breath caught. Scrawled across 2 pages were neat lists of numbers, like deposits, stretching back years. They didn't line up with any job I knew he'd worked. They were too consistent, too intentional. And beside one entry, in his jagged handwriting, were 3 words, not in bank. I sat there on the cold garage floor, the notebook in one hand, the lockbox in the other, my pulse hammering. Maybe Dad hadn't died broke after all. Maybe he'd just hidden what he had. Once I had the lockbox and the notebook, I couldn't stop. Every spare hour I was back at Dad's house, tearing through corners I'd ignored. The attic, closets, even the crawl space that reeked of mildew. I started noticing patterns. Old bank statements tucked into drawers showed small deposits that didn't make sense. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Too regular to be chance. Then there were receipts. One from a hardware store for pipes, lumber, and a lock I never saw installed. Another from a storage company I didn't even know he used. My head spun. Part of me was exhilarated, chasing threads. Another part whispered I was desperate, seeing meaning in scraps. When I mentioned the odd deposits at dinner, my aunt laughed. Don't romanticize him. He was a good man, but careless. Accept it. The room went quiet, everyone nodding, and I swallowed my protest. But the house kept whispering to me. In the back of Dad's closet, inside the pocket of an old coat, I found an envelope brittle with dust. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On one side, a hand-drawn map, a rectangle labeled shed, an X in the corner, and the words, Key inside safe. On the back, in his crooked handwriting, "Not all debts are what they seem." I stood there in the dim light, the hanger creaking above me, the paper trembling in my hands. For weeks, I'd been drowning in overdue bills and whispers of failure. Everyone told me to stop imagining things. But this wasn't imagination. This was a trail he had left on purpose. And suddenly, the question wasn't if my father had left something. It was why he had hidden it. I couldn't shake the map from my mind. I folded it into my pocket and carried it everywhere, like it was burning a hole through the fabric. It pointed to the shed, what Dad always called the barn, though it was nothing more than a rotting lean-to behind the house. One afternoon, when the family was gone, I slipped outside with the key from the lockbox. The shed door groaned when I pushed it open. Inside smelled of damp earth and rust. Old tools leaned against warped boards, and the whole place felt ready to collapse. I followed the map to the corner marked with an X. At first, it was just cracked floorboards and dirt, but when I pressed down, one of the boards shifted. My pulse jumped. I pried it loose and uncovered a small metal safe, wedged deep into the ground, scarred with rust. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock. For a moment, it resisted. Then, click. I lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of cash, rubber banded tight. More money than I'd ever seen in my life. They smelled faintly of dust and oil, like him. Beneath the bundles were folders thick with paperwork. Property deeds in his name, share certificates, old bank slips that went back years. Each deposit was logged in his messy handwriting, dates and amounts lined up in neat rows. He hadn't been careless at all. He'd been deliberate, careful, patient. And at the bottom of the safe, under the last folder, was an envelope with my name on it. Just my name, written in his crooked scrawl. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a short note, ink smudged in places. "They'll never understand, but you will. This isn't about money, it's about keeping what's ours safe. Don't let them waste it. You're the only one I trust." Tears blurred the page. For weeks, I'd been swallowing the shame of thinking he left nothing but debts. For weeks, I let people call him reckless, careless, broke. But he wasn't. He had been building something. Quietly, secretly, in a way no one else could see. And he left it for me to find. I thought about keeping it secret, guarding it the way Dad had. But secrets rot when you sit on them too long, and the weight of that safe pressed on me until I couldn't breathe. So I called a family meeting. We gathered around the dining table, the same one where Dad used to sit with a cigarette in one hand and a mug of black coffee in the other. I laid the folders down, cash slips, deeds, bank statements, and for a moment, silence swallowed the room. Then it broke. "You're lying. This isn't real. You forged this. You're keeping it for yourself." Accusations came from every side, voices overlapping until it felt like the walls were closing in. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just opened the envelope with my name on it, the one I'd found at the bottom of the safe. Dad's handwriting was unmistakable, jagged and uneven. I read the note aloud, my voice shaking. "They'll never understand, but you will. This isn't about money, it's about keeping what's ours safe. Don't let them waste it. You're the only one I trust." The words hung in the air like smoke. Some relatives stared at their laps, unwilling to meet my eyes. Others glared at me with venom, as if the note itself was a weapon I'd turned against them. But then I dropped the final piece on the table. A legal will, newer than the one they thought existed. Clear, notarized, unambiguous. Every pound, every property, every share, left to me. No splits, no cousins, no uncles or aunts, just me. The room fractured instantly. One cousin shoved their chair back, muttering, "This family is finished." An aunt accused me of manipulating him. Another hissed that I'd always been his favorite. Someone stormed out. Someone else started to cry. The voices blurred into a single roar of betrayal and disbelief. I sat frozen, numb. The papers spread in front of me like broken glass. Proof that my father wasn't the careless failure they'd painted him to be. Proof that he had trusted me, chosen me. But instead of relief, all I felt was the cold weight of isolation. Because in that moment, I wasn't vindicated. I was alone. After the meeting, silence became the only language my family spoke to me. Calls went unanswered, emails ignored, invitations stopped coming. Birthdays and holidays passed without so much as a text. The same people who used to crowd into Dad's house for Sunday dinners now crossed the street to avoid me. It wasn't the money that broke us. It was the story. To them, I wasn't the daughter who found the truth. I was the one who took everything. At first, I tried to fight it. I sent copies of the documents, highlighted the dates, the signatures, the notarizations. I even mailed photos of Dad's note, his handwriting etched in ink no one could fake. But every explanation just made the silence heavier. Eventually, I stopped trying. I'd walk through the house we used to share, hear echoes of laughter from birthdays that felt like another life, and realize those memories weren't enough to hold us together. Greed had splintered the family, yes, but so had grief. They needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. So I turned inward. I started visiting Dad's grave, alone. The cemetery was quiet, just rows of stone and the soft whistle of wind through the trees. I'd bring flowers, sometimes fresh, sometimes wilted from forgetting to change the water, and sit cross-legged in front of his headstone. The first time I read his note out loud there, my voice cracked on the words, "You're the only one I trust." I cried until the pages blurred, my forehead pressed against the cold stone, whispering questions he couldn't answer. Why did you hide it? Why didn't you trust anyone else? Why leave me to carry this alone? I never got answers, but over time, I realized maybe answers weren't the point. Maybe what he left me wasn't just money or deeds or shares. Maybe it was the weight of faith. Faith that I'd understand when no one else could. Faith that I'd look deeper instead of settling for the easy story. And that, I think, was his final gift. Because inheritance isn't just numbers in a bank account. It's not property lines or court documents. It's the weight of someone's trust. It's the stories written in grease-stained notebooks, the care taken to tuck a map into a dusty coat pocket, the quiet decision to choose one person above all others. Standing there at his grave, I realized the money would change my life, but the trust would shape me. The fortune wasn't just stacks of cash or signed deeds. It was proof that my father saw me, believed in me, even when everyone else doubted him. And for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel ashamed. He didn't die broke. He died misunderstood. The world saw a reckless man who left nothing. But I knew better. He had built something, hidden it, and trusted me to find it. And the fortune he left wasn't just money. It was the proof that my father, in all his flaws and secrecy, had never stopped looking out for me. That's the inheritance I carry now. Not just cash, not just deeds, but the story of a man everyone else dismissed, and the trust he left in my hands to keep alive, and I'll never let anyone take that away.